Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's December 28, 2017, and this is episode 601. Having just taken delivery of my brand spanking new iMac Pro, today I'm going to share my first impressions of this awesome machine, with a few comparisons to other Apple computers of recent years to give you an idea of the performance these new Pro machines can provide. I'd like to start by explaining a little about the specifications of the iMac Pro that I chose and my reasoning. First of all, my old iMac was 4 years old, so from a finance perspective, it has just fully depreciated. As a business owner, that's important to me. As a photographer, it was also important to me that I had started to feel a bit of stress with my old iMac through 2017 and felt that it was time to think about a bit of an upgrade. When I buy a new computer, I generally like to throw in as many upgrades as possible, but if you do that with the new iMac Pro, it'll cost you just over $13,000. And as much as I like to run a nice, powerful machine, there's no way that I could warrant that kind of money. So I looked at the options and tried to make as an intelligent decision about each component as possible. I was talking with Don Komarechka last week after we talked on his podcast, and Don was telling me that the computer he built 4 years ago with a 12-core CPU really wasn't maximizing on all of those cores. And when your software is using less than all of your cores, you might as well have a faster CPU. The options for the new iMac Pro range from 8 cores at 3.2 gigahertz up to 18 cores at 2.3 gigahertz. Because I don't see me really being able to capitalize on lots of cores, I figured it was probably wise to go for the 8-core CPU because it's faster at 3.2 gigahertz. So will probably speed up many of the processors that I run that won't really use more than all 8 cores. Plus, this is double my old iMac with 4 cores, so I figured it would still give me a significant boost in performance. I basically had to keep reminding myself that I was buying a pro-spec desktop as a photographer that deals mainly with big files, but not necessarily crunching huge processor-intensive jobs like 3D rendering. And I don't do enough video to really benefit from more than 8 cores. My next decision was the amount of memory, and again, I decided to double the 32 that I have in my old iMac to 64 gigabytes in the new iMac Pro. It was $800 to double this to 64 gigabytes, but quadrupling it to 128 gigabytes was $1,600, and I figured I could live without that. So far, I've been keeping an eye on memory usage and rarely using even close to all of my 64 gigabytes, so at this point, I'm happy with my decision. Next up was another $800 to double the size of the internal SSD drive from 1 terabyte to 2 terabytes. And again, a decision to forego paying $2,800 to go for the 4 terabyte version. I was actually pretty comfortable with this from the start, as apart from when I had a rogue program create a 1.2 terabyte log file recently that filled my 3 terabyte hard drive on my old iMac, I have never really used much more than 1.5 terabytes, as I store most of the stuff that I don't use often on my Drobo connected by Thunderbolt. And by doing that, a little bit more aggressively, I can't see 2 terabytes ever being a problem. I've actually at this point pretty much got everything that I need installed, including some very large music production software and sound banks, and I have only used 700 gigabytes, so I'm in good shape in this respect. My old iMac had 4 gigabytes of graphic memory, so following the same doubling up strategy would have had me happy to stick with the standard 8 gigabyte Radeon Pro Vega 56 graphics card. But photography related programs like Capture One Pro and Photoshop really do get a boost from more graphics memory. So I decided to upgrade this to the 16 gigabyte Vega 64 version of the Radeon Pro. And I'll show you some numbers shortly to illustrate that this was a pretty good decision. A minor detail, but I also went for the space gray Magic Trackpad rather than the Magic Mouse 2, as I don't really like to use a mouse. The trackpad has been my preferred interface for many years now, and I love how you can use lots of different gestures with the Apple Magic Trackpad, speeding up how I use my computer in many ways. Although I bought my new iMac Pro in Japan for what feels like an infinitely larger amount, if I dial my choices into the US Apple Store website, I see that my configuration comes to a cool $7,249. Not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but when we consider the power of this machine and the fact that it's Apple and simply beautiful, I'm not too uncomfortable with this. I was pleasantly surprised by how quickly the iMac Pro arrived. The delivery dates quoted when I ordered it was between December 30 and January 7. So when I received a notification that the customized iMac Pro had shipped on December 22 for delivery on December 24, I was pretty happy, as it gave me time to work on setting it up and writing this review before I get busy again from the new year. As you can see from the image that I've embedded in the blog at mbp.ac/601, the iMac Pro comes in a relatively compact package. It's actually smaller than a 27-inch display box from other manufacturers. In the middle image, you can see that there is just a little padding between the outer box and the white box inside, and then a little bit of molded cardboard protecting the screen, which is wrapped in a kind of paper cloth and has a protective plastic core inside that. Of course, the package is so small because the entire computer is packed inside the display in true iMac style. So despite the power, there's no need for a big chunky desktop tower or even the cylinder in which Apple put the Mac Pro. In the next image, we can see that on the back of the iMac Pro, there's a range of interfaces available, which from left to right are the earphones jack, an SDXC card slot, 4 USB 3 ports, and 4 Thunderbolt 3 or USB-C ports, and an Ethernet port. The inclusion of the USB-C ports was part of my decision to upgrade, as my 13-inch MacBook Pro has these, and I'm now using external SanDisk Extreme 900 SSD drives to store my current year of photos and all of my final select images, so that I can use them while traveling and then just plug them into my iMac when I get home. Although the SanDisk SSDs were fast over USB 3, they scream over USB-C because they are USB 3.1 Gen 2 with a logical speed of up to 10 gigabytes per second. We'll move on and look at the actual speed of these drives in a moment. Basically though, now that I can move these drives between my two main computers and stay on USB 3.1 Gen 2, I get to run them at their maximum speed regardless of which computer I'm on, and that's great. It may not be obvious from the photo of the back of my iMac Pro because of the light pouring into my studio, but Apple decided to make the iMac Pro available only in space gray. That suits me fine because I've been choosing space gray for my other Apple devices since it became available. My iPhone, my iPad Pro, my MacBook Pro are all space gray. Purely aesthetic, of course. I was also happy to see that Apple had exclusively included a space gray Magic Keyboard and Magic Trackpad 2 with the iMac Pro. I'm really happy to now have a numeric keypad on the keyboard again, although I have just about gotten out of the habit of using it now after 7 years without this feature. I always used to enjoy using the numeric pad when doing accounts and calculations or just entering numbers in general. So it took a lot of getting used to not having this when I first switched to Apple. Now I have this back, and I think I've only used it once, but I'm sure I'll slip back into my old ways in the coming weeks. I was surprised at how thin the Magic Keyboard is, actually sitting a millimeter or so lower than the Magic Trackpad 2, which is also very thin, but it feels great to type on. I'm, of course, preparing this blog post on the new keyboard, and it's very comfortable to work with and incredibly stylish, so it looks great on my desk in space gray. There is a black lightning cable included that at first I couldn't quite figure out. Some sites are making a fuss about this being the first black lightning cable that Apple has made, which to me isn't necessarily exciting, since you can buy third-party lightning cables in a variety of colors. Then though, as I reached for a cable to charge the new space gray Magic Keyboard, I realized how much, in comparison, a white cable now stands out on my desk. So I plugged in the black cable, and it actually looks really nice. Of course, it also hit me then that I needed a lightning cable to charge the keyboard and trackpad, which is why Apple included it. All in all, I realized that it was not only necessary, but quite a nice touch for it to be black, given the overall dark color palette used for this new Pro iMac line. So enough about the appearance. Let's look at some performance numbers. I've tried not to be overly technical or scientific in my tests, but for the main benchmarking, I've used a program called Geekbench to gather some metrics from the 4 Mac computers that I currently still have access to. Rather than me reeling these off here, if you are interested in looking at the details of my benchmark tests, you can see them on my public Geekbench page, which is at mbp.ac/geekbench. We will compare the main scores here though. So the image that I have embedded in the blog shows you, first of all, how the 8-core iMac Pro CPU fares in comparison to my late 2013 iMac, my late 2016 MacBook Pro 13-inch, and my mid-2012 MacBook Pro 15-inch. The first thing that I noticed from these results is how much more powerful the Xeon processor in the iMac Pro is compared to my still very respectable i7 processor from my 4-year-old iMac in single core mode. Despite the i7 being a 3.5 GHz CPU and the iMac Pro being a 3.2 GHz CPU, the i7 single core scored 4,366 compared to 5,005 from the Xeon 3.2 GHz CPU in the iMac Pro. This means that when I'm working in programs that don't really make use of multiple cores, I'm still going to benefit from the speed of the Xeon processor, even though it's essentially 0.3 GHz slower. Of course, the main benefit is going to come when using programs that use multiple cores, especially when they're able to use many, if not all, 8 cores. And we can see that the multiple core score really knocks it out of the park compared to my earlier 4-core machines. The iMac Pro clocked a very respectable 31,090 compared to 14,866 from my iMac and 13,190 from my 4-core MacBook Pro. It's also worth noting that my newer 13-inch MacBook Pro, only having 2 cores, is significantly slower than my old 15-inch MacBook Pro with double the cores. This is to be expected, of course, as the 13-inch MacBook Pro is really a compromise. I went for the 13-inch MacBook Pro for its size more than power, although I must say I have not really found it to be much slower in practical use than the 15-inch MacBook Pro with 4 cores. The other comparison I was able to do with Geekbench is to compare the graphics processor speeds, as you can see in this following screenshot that I've embedded in the blog post. The OpenCL score on my non-Retina 4-year-old iMac with 4 gigabytes of video RAM is 36,242 compared to a whopping 175,507 on the iMac Pro with the upgraded Radeon Pro graphics card with 16 gigabytes of RAM. I have a 32-inch 4K display from BenQ attached to my iMac, and to be totally honest, my non-Retina 4-year-old iMac really struggled to drive this display. The new iMac Pro, though, can drive up to 4 external 4K displays and 2 external 5K displays, so the BenQ 4K display is now as happy as can be sitting attached to my iMac Pro. Curious, I ran the Geekbench benchmark tests on my iMac Pro both with and without the 4K external display attached and found that the performance was unchanged. In fact, in some cases, the performance actually improved with a second display attached, but the amount was small, so probably just natural variance from other services running on the machine. In short, though, if you need to run multiple displays and have found this taxing on your system with previous generations of the iMac, particularly, I imagine, the pre-5K iMacs, like my old one, then you needn't worry about that with the iMac Pro. I won't spend any more time going through these results for now, but if you're interested, as I mentioned earlier, you can dig into my results and compare them to other computers on the Geekbench website, and there is a link in the show notes to jump over to that. One other important thing for speeding up a photographer's workflow is the speed of the internal hard drive, or better still these days, a solid state drive or SSD, which is what now comes as standard in the iMac Pro. Using a fast SSD to work from will speed up your image processing more than any other single factor, although the CPU clock speed and amount of RAM and video memory also plays parts in this equation. The one thing that I regretted scrimping on in my old iMac was the hard drive. I took a gamble on Apple's Fusion Drive, hoping that the built-in SSD accelerator component would give me respectable performance. But my 4-year-old iMac gave me a write speed of just 67.5 megabytes per second and a better, but still relatively poor, read speed of 568 megabytes per second. By comparison, the SSD that I have in my new iMac Pro is giving me a whopping 2,808 megabytes per second write speed and 2,476 megabytes per second read speed. These speeds almost make me want to run my Capture One Pro catalogs from the internal SSD on my iMac Pro. but my external SanDisk Extreme 900 drives still give me 754 megabytes per second write and 860 megabytes per second read speeds over USB 3.1 Gen 2. So I'm going to continue to work from these drives to enable me to move easily between computers. I tested my drive speed with the Blackmagic Design Disk Speed Test application available for free from the Apple App Store. I also compared the amount of time it takes Capture One Pro to open my Finals catalog on both my 13-inch MacBook Pro and the new iMac Pro. The first time I switched computers on the MacBook Pro, launching the catalog from my external SanDisk Extreme 900 SSD takes 28 seconds. Then, from the second time I open the catalog on the MacBook Pro, it takes 12 seconds. By comparison, on the iMac Pro running the exact same catalog from the same external SSD, these times are exactly halved. It takes 14 seconds to open the catalog the first time, then just 6 seconds to open it from the second time onwards. My Finals catalog is currently weighing in at 11.7 gigabytes and contains 7,800 images. My 2017 catalog, containing a few images under 22,000, currently weighs in at 40.4 gigabytes. My 2017 catalog takes around 11 seconds to open on the iMac Pro and around 22 seconds to open on my 13-inch MacBook Pro. The most important thing for me to note here, and probably the most important thing for any photographer to keep in mind, is that I'm completely thrilled by the fact that once my images are loaded into Capture One Pro and the previews are generated, most of the time the images display instantly when moving back and forth through my images with the computer's arrow keys. Occasionally, there is a half second or so lag before the image reses in, but never more than that. I have my preview image size set to 3,840 pixels wide in Capture One Pro preferences, which is 4K resolution. You might wonder why I haven't set this to 5,120 for 5K resolution now that I've got a 5K iMac Pro, but my reasoning is that I generally review my images with the toolbar displayed in Capture One Pro, so I don't really need the full 5K resolution previews. Also, my tests have shown that even on the 5K display, the images appear clear and pretty much instantly in both preview sizes. My other reasons are that I actually display the images on the 4K display attached to my iMac more than the iMac screen itself, and keeping the previews at 4K instead of 5K helps me to keep my catalog sizes down. The larger my previews are, the larger those catalog files get. Also, for a significant amount of time, I open these catalogs and view the images on my MacBook Pro, and 380 pixels wide is more than enough for that screen too. Before we move on, I'd like to stress once again how important the ability to view images instantly is to me. We look at thousands and thousands of photographs each year. If we count the number of times we view each image during the many iterations of our editing process, we're likely viewing images millions of times. If it takes a number of seconds for these images to appear as we work, that soon mounts up and introduces a lot of stress into our workflows. As my old iMac gradually slowed down, I found myself pretty stressed as we've progressed through 2017. And I simply didn't want to start my Japan winter tours in January knowing that I'd have to come home and try to rush through my processing between each tour in an environment that causes me stress. I should clarify that most of that stress was actually coming from how slow the 4K display was running on my non-Retina iMac and not from Capture One Pro. But I do like the 32-inch screen, and it will now work great with the beautiful new 5K display of the iMac Pro with its 1 billion color support. The built-in speakers on the iMac Pro aren't important for me because I'm a bit of an audiophile and I have a pair of very good quality Onkyo speakers either side of my desk, which I always use. Having said that, I couldn't resist taking a listen to the built-in speakers, and although they're a little tinny in comparison to my Onkyo speakers, they give a respectable sound. If you don't have any external speakers or just want to keep a clean, uncluttered workspace, they're probably more than adequate. The only scenario when I can see me using the internal speakers in my workspace is when I'm working at my music workstation opposite my main desk, and I pump the audio from that setup through the same Onkyo speakers. So I might need to activate the built-in iMac Pro speakers in order to listen to something from the iMac at the same time. One final thing that I want to do, but I've run out of time as I try to prepare to get this episode out. I'm already late this week, is that I wanted to report on any drop in speed of the SSD after turning on File Vault 2 encryption. Having changed the SSD format on my 13-inch MacBook Pro to the new Apple file system introduced with High Sierra, which enables higher performance encryption, among other things, I checked to see if turning on File Vault and encrypting the contents of my SSD slowed down the read-write performance at all, and I was very happy to see that there was no change. So I'm going to turn on File Vault on my new iMac Pro 2 just as soon as I finish recording this podcast. It will probably take about 6 hours to encrypt the data, but once it's settled down, I'll run the disk speed test again and add the results as a note to the blog post, which again is at mbp.ac/601, just to keep you in the loop. Sure, this is more important for a mobile computer that has a greater risk of ending up in the wrong hands. But if there's no change in performance, I can't think of a reason not to turn on File Vault. So as we start to wrap this up, I'd like to add a few extra thoughts. I'm sure some of you will wonder if I regret not going for the higher multi-core CPU models. And all I can say for now is that I'm currently very happy with my decision to go with the standard 8-core CPU. It's still way faster than my old iMac. And for a predominantly still photographer, having the power to view my images instantly, which this machine gives me, is amazing. Right now, I'm thinking that my customization pennies were spent in the right areas, with an internal SSD that's big enough to hold everything I need without going the whole hog for the 4TB option. The additional video memory taking me to 16 gigabytes also seems to have been money well spent, playing a part in getting my images on screen quickly. At the end of the day, this is a professional line of desktop computers that will deliver pretty amazing power even without the upgrades I chose. But if funds allow, the areas I upgraded are probably money well spent. I'm sure I would benefit occasionally from having even more power, but I really can't warrant spending any more than the already very high price that I laid out for this computer with my customizations. I also think that adding these few extra customizations will help to future-proof my investment. Ideally, I'd really like to not have to replace this machine in 4 years, like I did my old iMac, which, in case you're wondering, is not going to go to waste. I've moved it to the other side of my studio, and it's now driving my music producing workstation. It won't be retired after just 4 years. If you aren't an Apple user, you probably didn't really need to listen to this, if you even got this far. But if you are interested in this new Pro lineup from Apple, I hope you found this useful. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please share a link with your friends. Subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast program to ensure uninterrupted delivery. If you have a moment to rate the podcast or leave us a review in iTunes, that helps to keep us relevant in the huge number of podcasts out there now. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+, and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye-bye.